Alright, it's been a couple weeks since I did a video. I've been really busy with work. Some of you who know me on Facebook, sorry, I'm looking at the camera, but the camera's here, saw me post that I'm still doing well in West Virginia. I just finished the one that I've been working on all month. I'm starting a new one. I'm going to train someone else to take my place. Driving home to Michigan. Then I'm flying to Colorado, getting my truck. Then I'm driving to Utah to pick up some supplies. Then I'm driving to Kansas to work on some wells there, and then I'm going to drive to Oklahoma and start some new programs there. Uh, Possibly all within the next 2 weeks. So it's going to be a busy time period here. And I've been so busy just with these wells, I haven't really been thinking about YouTube very much, which apparently has done well for my views. The last 5 videos I've done have all garnered about double the normal number of hits, and I have no idea why that is. They didn't become really popular. They don't get tons and tons of comments or likes or anything. They're just getting out there a little bit more, and I don't know why. YouTube is a really mysterious thing, and I'm curious about why things happen the way that they do, but I don't imagine any way of actually finding out. So I wanted to talk about a topic that actually came up in a Reddit debate. I posted on a Reddit forum for gay people, and I said, I'm a libertarian, and gay people tend not to are often not very receptive to that idea, and sometimes actually not infrequently very, very hostile to it. And this is just kind of me to see how warranted that is. And long story short, the answer is that there's some basis to that stereotype. It's not always true. Of course, there are other libertarians who are gay. And there are gays who are somewhat ambivalent about it, but then there are many who are overtly hostile. But in the course of that, I got in a long debate with somebody who the initial kind of focus of the debate was, we need government to do things like public transit and specifically subways, and then it kind of became a little bit more general and became a discussion about government taxation is justified as payment for positive externalities. Now, usually when externalities are discussed in political debates about libertarianism, it's usually in the context of negative externalities. The idea that people's behavior, they can have negative consequences on other people, and there needs to be a way to curtail that, and government is the one and only institution that can possibly do that. Positive externalities, I don't hear that often, but he was using it basically as a justification for taxation. And there's a couple problems with that, and that's what I want to make this video about. Now, the first thing to kind of jumps out at me in this conversation, this guy lives in New York City and has been an urbanite his entire life, and there's a clear myopia there. There's somebody who has had a certain experience and then extrapolates that as being somehow the only possible, plausible, or likely experience. So for him, the idea that you have to have public transit is sacrosanct. It is just part of his history. He can't imagine it being another way. And he likes it. I mean, he was being pretty upfront and just saying, I really, really like the subway system, and I like the fact that it's subsidized, because if it wasn't subsidized, I would have to pay more. And that's, to be perfectly frank, an extremely selfish rationalization, which is, I'm not against selfish rationalizations, but it goes kind of contrary to the altruistic, collectivistic rhetoric that is usually employed. In his, it's pretty common. I mean, even Mises said that he almost forgave the government for subsidizing opera because he really liked opera, and he didn't think it would really exist very often without state subsidy, and so he liked it so much that he almost thought it was justified, but he kind of left it there and said it's almost justified, implying, of course, that it's not. And so this guy, clearly, the main motivation for him justifying public expenditures in this particular area, aka the subway, but this would be extrapolated to roads, schools, whatever, is that he used it and he liked using it, and he didn't think that he should have to pay the full price for whatever he was doing. But I think he realized that does sound kind of selfish, so he brought up this whole, well, because I was saying, look, if you want to use the subway, that's fine, and then you should pay the cost of that. And if not enough people are willing to pay the price involved in, say, subway tickets, then then they'll go out of business. And you can't go to third parties and say, well, you owe me to pay. And he said, yes, you can, because third parties benefit. So the argument was, well, I'll come back to that in a second. So let me address this myopia thing. I just really am annoyed when people, and it's similar to conservative bias, where people, they experience one thing and then they believe that's got to be the way. And it's so, you see red flags like this whenever you get in debates, especially if you get debates with people from other countries, and they say and I just saw this yesterday with a whole bunch of Canadians bashing the U.S. healthcare system. They basically are saying, our system is perfect, your system is screwed up. Of course, they have all these, and our system is screwed up, but they have all these totally complete misunderstandings of what's in the U.S. Because they're saying there's a free market in healthcare in the United States, and it's like, no, that's not true. That's patently false, but that's what they believe. But so they think, the Canadian system's perfect, or the people in Finland think the Finnish education system is perfect, and it's got to be that way, or it's got to be like the NHS, or it's got to be, it's pure conservative bias. Now, that doesn't mean that you're wrong, because you grew up with a certain system does not mean that system is wrong. But people don't have much more justification beyond that's what I've experienced. And so people who grow up in a city where all the utilities are run by the government, by the municipality, tend to have this idea that it's impossible for utilities to be provided by anything other than the government. And this is not true, because we know the first utilities weren't provided by the government. Governments did not invent electrical power or plumbing or roads or schools or anything for that matter. Other entrepreneurs, this is especially true with electricity, came up with viable systems to produce and provide and distribute these goods on a profitable basis. And municipalities then would take them over for various reasons. Maybe they'd go bankrupt and they would come in and say, well, we want to keep this up. I think mostly they just saw it as a type of revenue creation. But the point is, historically, utilities have been provided by non-government agencies. And if we want to not even just use history as an example, in contemporary society, there are plenty of power companies that are not run by municipalities or by government. Now, they're all regulated to this or that amount, but there are plenty of places and plenty of people who don't have a government monopoly providing their energy requirements. I know where I live, everybody has their own well and their own septic system. Nobody has city sewer, city water. There's no piping system hooking all the houses and all the grids together. Everybody has their own well. And I've lived in other places when I do these oil rigs don't have their own wells. They just literally truck in the water. They have trucks come, big trucks that hold, 30,000 gallons. That's probably too much, but thousands and thousands of gallons, maybe 5,000 gallons, something like that, and they drop it off. And you say, well, that's an oil rig. But there are people who do that too. When I was working in Utah, it was a very arid region, and there are people who own houses way up and on the buttes or on the benches, and there's no way they can run 10 miles of piping to the nearest river or drill a 3,000-4,000 foot well to get to groundwater, assuming there even is any, to have water be at their house. So what do they do instead is they truck it in. They have either they own their own tanks or they hire someone. It's not super expensive. It's not the most convenient, but if you want to live out there, then that's kind of how you have to deal with it, and people do. And you could do that in a city. It would not be difficult to have a water tank in a city. People do this with propane all the time. Again, where I live, in my particular house, there's actually gas that's delivered from a gas company, but many people have their own propane tanks. And it's not some logistically impossible thing. A propane tank doesn't take blocks and blocks. You can have that in a relatively small area. The same thing with a water tank. And the problem with the municipalities is they just don't, they categorically don't allow it. I'm primarily been a rural person, but I haven't always been a hillbilly, and I lived in the capital of Michigan for a long time. And uh, there was a municipal monopoly on both power and electricity. Uh, and there was an oligopoly in trash collection and most of the other services, where there was a perfunctory allowable competition from like one other firm. But the power, it wasn't just monopoly, because if you decided, hey, you know what, I'm just going to live in my house without power for a while, that was not allowed. Your house would become condemned and you'd be evicted for that reason. Even if you were to provide your own power, even if you were to say, you know what, I believe in green energy, I'm going to put some solar panels and maybe some wind turbines, and or I'm going to run it off batteries or whatever, and it's not going to cost the city anything. And if you use solar panels, it's hard to see how that would be hurting anybody around you, how that would produce any negative externalities. And I'm just going to live with that amount of power. Or you could say I'm going to get a generator. That's not that difficult either. Or I'm just going to not have power for a while. People go without cable. People go without water. It's possible. Or reduce their consumption because quite frankly, they feel they can't afford it, or they'd rather have the money for something else, for some higher desired end. And that's just was completely outlawed. And I just think that's outrageous to think it shouldn't even be allowed, because granted, most people aren't going to do that, but some people are, and that's going to lower the price, and that's going to produce a little bit of competition. And then the provider is going to have to realize, okay, I can't put prices too high, because then people are just going to get their own water tanks or propane tanks, or get solar panels, or get wind turbines, or they're going to start generating their own power and selling it to their neighbors. And so that's kind of what is going to keep prices down, even if it's practically difficult, if not impossible, to have overlapping infrastructures, overlapping pipings and wires, which is, of course, that's possible. I don't know why people think that's impossible, but this guy is coming from a world where it's got to be the way I'm used to, and I like this service. I like getting subsidized, and hence the subsidy is justifiable. But he, I think, realized that wasn't a good enough argument, so he brought up this positive externalities argument. And there's a couple of big problems with this line of reasoning. One is that it's, in most cases, almost impossible to assess. In his example, he's saying, well, the subway, even if you didn't use it, and we made some headway, because I said the subways weren't originally created by the state, or by the government. They were created by private companies. And he said, yes, that's true. And so I said, well, that contradicts your whole claim that it's quote unquote impossible. Obviously, it is possible, even if it is hard or difficult. And he said, yes. The way he said it, this is going off of his history. I didn't check it, but it sounded plausible to me. There were 2 or 3 subway companies in New York City, all started for profit. They charged, fares, and eventually 1 or 2 of them went out of business, and the other ones merged. And then finally, the one that was left was going to go bankrupt, and so the city took it over. And then, of course, the city subsidizes it with taxes, because they wasn't making enough with tickets, and so they thought, well, we'll just tax everybody. That will make it enough. And then he is thankful for this, because he uses it then. He's getting subsidized by everybody else. And where to start? I said, well, you're assuming that the reason that the government did that then was quote unquote for the common good. When this is New York City, we're talking about what is historically usually considered one of the most corrupt city governments in the world, or at least in the country, not in the world necessarily. And it's not implausible to assume that they would want to use taxpayer money to ingratiate themselves. They can then tax everybody, buy this subway, and then act like they are giving the subway to everybody else, that they are philanthropists, that they are providing a charity, or at the very least a service, when they are doing so with other people's money. And that, of course, entails an enormous amount of moral hazard, because next thing you know, they're going to be taking over the utility companies and the roads and the schools and fire protection and whatever other things, and just saying, I'm going to take this over. and we're going to do it for the quote-unquote public good, and they can do this to anything. Anything that anybody uses, food, and of course they're regulating that very heavily, anything, and they can take it over. It wouldn't be nationalizing, but municipalizing or governmentizing um, whatever they want, and then they can always have as a pretext that they're doing it for the common good, and then they can make money. I mean, they're going to give the contracts to run the place to their cronies. They're going to make money off the ticket. I mean, they're using taxpayer money to buy the utility or the function or the good or the service, but then they can skim whatever off the top of the running costs or the profits, if there are any, which there probably won't be, to their heart's content. And then, of course, they have a whole nother, all the employees of the subway or the bus system or the train system or the ferry system or whatever it is, become their cronies, become people who are indebted to them, who will vote for them, who will donate to them. The moral hazard here is just obvious, and it's really hard to assess. The other problem is it's really hard, in fact, in most cases, quite frankly, impossible to calculate how beneficial these positive externalities actually are. His main argument, the only one that I heard him use, was that it reduces congestion, which is presumably true, but it doesn't. I am fairly certain, and again, I didn't do some research to prove this, that the subway system in New York City does not uniformly reduce congestion everywhere in the city at the same time, nor is everyone in the city of New York equally affected by whatever reductions of congestion there happen to be. There are, for instance, people in New York City, as there are in any city, who don't own cars, and actually that's pretty common in New York City, I'm told, who don't need mechanical transit that often. They need a bike or their legs. They can get by on the sidewalks. You have lots of retirees or older people who live in apartments, and maybe they have the local teenage boy bring their groceries over, and how affected are they by the amount of congestion? Not very much. And then, of course, you have people who drive taxi cabs, and well, they're affected by the congestion an awful lot, but they're also negatively affected by the fact that so much of their business is now going to be on the subways, and this is another problem. There are negative externalities also associated with the subway. There are people who are going to be victimized by crime that may begin to exist in the subways, which has historically happened. I don't know if it's rampant right now, but it's historically something that happens. If you live near or by an access port to the subway system or whatever it is, it's very likely that you might actually have more congestion than you normally would. There might be noise problems. I don't know how often that's the case. There might be other types of utility interruption. Obvious cases, like if you have a taxi, you are going to have less income, even though the taxi system in New York is based on a total lack of competition. There's a set number of taxis, which is why they cost so much. But that's a negative externality. How is that calculated in weighing the positive externality? Of course, I asked him that. He did not have an answer. That's when he stopped responding. But there's really no good way to assess what the value of the benefit is to any particular person, let alone to all people generally. And there's no attempt to really even assess that in the tax bill. The tax bill is an arbitrary, unilateral set by the government, and at no point do they attempt to say, well, these are the benefits that you haven't paid for in ticket prices, or you haven't paid for directly, and so we're assessing that this is what it is. No, there's no tie. Your taxes that are demanded have no plausible link to any goods or services or positive externalities that you receive from government monopolized utilities. That is just an excuse. That is a pretext to justify the taxation, but there's no even pretend attempt to calculate what that would be. So if that's what it is, I mean, I could almost understand. I said, okay, you don't ever use the roads, you don't ever get out very much, or you live in a section of the city that's not really even close to the subway, so you're going to only owe 1/10 as much. But that's not how it works, and so that's not how you should pretend that it's working. Then there's a whole other moral question. Is it even correct or justifiable to demand payment for positive externalities? Because everything that could be considered positive to anybody would then fall under the category of being worthy of not restitution, but worthy of reimbursement by whoever it's benefiting. And of course, this goes way beyond government or utilities. My wearing deodorant or combing my hair or having a nice garden, those are all things that could plausibly make people have a better day. And I could then go to them and say, listen, aren't you happy that I don't smell really bad? Wouldn't it ruin your day if I, was really stinky or vile and disgusting and unable to bathe? And so here's my bill for all my, toiletries that I use. How would I even divide that up? How would I decide how much people owe for that? Or a more clear-cut example, that's one that you might actually even be able to calculate, is if you were to improve your home. Say you were to do a lot of, say you put $50,000 worth of improvements onto your house. Depending on the neighborhood you live in, there's a very good chance that that will raise the property values on the market, not hypothetically or imaginarily raise the values of the surrounding homes. Could you then go to your neighbors and be like, listen, remember that great kitchen I put in, that I paved my driveway and, did all this landscaping and repainted my house? Right. Okay. Well, that was $50,000, and I checked with the assayer, and the property values of your home went up $3,000 because of that, or however much. And so I want you. Would that then entitle you to however much their house went up in value, or half of that amount, or, I mean, the argument here would apply basically to everything. Everybody would be accruing debts to everybody else, and I think that's totally unjustifiable. If someone does not make a volitional act to cause something, then they cannot be responsible for it. It's not my call. I had no say into whether or not you put money into your house. So you cannot then come to me and demand payment for a service that I never asked for. Likewise, even if you riding the subway lowers congestion, you cannot come to me and then say, listen, you have to subsidize my use because if I didn't run the subway, then there would be more congestion. And I would just say, I have no ability to tell you whether you can or can't ride the subway. So you can't blame me or charge me for that good or service, because it's not something that I had any control over. And of course, the moral hazard here is, again, obvious and enormous. Then you could just start charging for anything. And the whole public good, common good, he didn't actually use these phrases, but this is what it kind of starts to boil down to, is that terminology is, I think Hayek had a great quote, it's sufficiently vague that it doesn't mean anything definite. And one could justify anything, any end, any taking, so-called, based on using that terminology, and just say it's for the common good, so you owe it. And of course, there's enormous moral hazard here, and governments use that justification for every kind of expenditure you can imagine, not just subways, but parks, museums, graffiti, funding research into all kinds of bizarre things. And politicians very rarely are at any point thinking, I'm going to do this because this is for the common good. That is the justification that they will give if they are ever asked, or if it ever comes up. That's going to be what they're going to say. They're never going to say what is probably the truth, is that they feel that they will somehow benefit by doing this. This expenditure of money will ingratiate them with this or that constituency to a more or less degree. Sometimes they are literally buying votes. They are literally repaying perhaps a major contributor by giving them contracts, or by regulating their competition, or by building something that's going to benefit them. And that's pretty clear. But even they can just get on people's good side. I know in my hometown, they wanted to, add to the school. And when they wanted to add to the school, they basically promised everything to everybody. Oh, we're going to give the soccer field to the soccer kids, and oh, we're going to get a better football field for the football kids, and oh, we're going to have a better art studio for the art kids and the band's going to get a new auditorium and a better band room, and the choir is going to get this, and the equestrian team's going to get this, and they basically would name every single group they possibly could, promise them something, and then once it was finally passed and they finally built the school, there was a prioritization, and basically 80% of what they promised was never delivered. But so the point, if it was really about common good, they would have said, okay, well, we really need all those things, and so we got to find a way to do it. But it was more, that's how we're going to get people to vote for us. That's how I'm going to further my political career. Now I can say I got a bond issue passed, and I can take credit for building a school, even though they probably, maybe they paid their quote-unquote fair share in taxes, but they force lots of other people to pay taxes, and then they can act like they're the patron of the city or the town or whatever. Likewise, there isn't some kind of magical calculus where government workers are figuring out what's for the common good and then pursuing that legislatively or through executive power and then saying, okay, we're going to have to tax this much to do this. It's what is best for me, the politician. The bureaucracies have their own inertia or their own kind of what they think is best for them that they will pursue, and it's self-interested. It is not altruistic. Now, if people just say, well, that's not what they say, and it's like, well, are you that naive that you want them to come out and say, geez, we want to take over the subway because we just think it's going to be a huge moneymaker for us. We'll be able to look like the whole ribbon cutting tendency where you can say, hey, look, I opened this, and then, of course, all the graft that's potential in something like that, hugely potential in something like that. And, of course, there's different kinds of graft. There's the overt money under the table, and then there's the whole, okay, the 10,000 employees now, you all owe me your political allegiance. If you want to keep your jobs, you'll vote for me kind of deal. The idea is, to me, it strikes me as unbelievably naive to think that that's not the main consideration. The main consideration is some kind of earnest attempt to fulfill the common good. I think there are politicians who feel that way every once in a while. Very, very few. They don't get very far because if they're not willing to wheel and deal, they don't usually have the support to get anywhere. But even the ones who do, the Dennis Kuciniches of the world or whoever you want to name, the one unusual politician that you think, even though they break the rule, you're going to assume is the normal way everyone should be, they don't have the information necessary to make those decisions. Dennis Kucinich, just to use him as an example, he does not know how much a subway system would benefit people. He doesn't know what the negative or the positive externalities would be. If, for instance, divorced from prices on the market, he doesn't know what the value of the good is relative to the costs involved. They can't even make a decent estimate of what it will even cost to run usually. And so how can he come to any kind of rational, scientific, reasonable assessment of whether or not this or that is worth? That's why I think it's so important to emphasize the voluntary nature of transactions. If they're voluntary, then you know that both parties, at least ex ante, at least in the beginning, assess that the exchange is worthwhile, that they are both benefiting. And so if the two parties that are involved are both benefiting, then there is a net social benefit. If, however, you have unilateral exchange where one party is forcing the other party and saying, okay, maybe you don't agree, but we're going to do it anyway, and you're going to have to, then there's a question there. Okay, the one party obviously thinks they're benefiting, and the other party obviously doesn't because they did not voluntarily agree. So the net social gain is dubious at the very best. It's probably neutral and it's probably negative. When you start throwing in moral hazard in there and say, well, this one institution is going to get to have, the power to make unilateral transactional decisions, I mean, there can't be a more morally hazardous situation. And there's a logical leap in here, and I've kind of alluded to it. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that positive externalities do somehow entail a debt. How does that debt accrue to one particular institution? Why is it that the government gets to be the reciprocal, the creditor, the institution that somehow is entitled to that? Why not, the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts or the Sierra Club or whatever, the National Baseball League? The fact that I do something and it benefits other people, why does that suddenly mean that everyone owes the government? Why wouldn't they owe me? If the private subway system is causing all these positive externalities that people are just being greedy and not subsidizing, and it's benefiting them, then wouldn't they owe money to the subway company and not to the city of New York that didn't create the subway company? There's probably a logical explanation, another logical leap in the explanation that involves the magic of voting, which is it's sort of like He-Man. He's just this normal guy, and then he says the magic words, and instead of becoming super powerful, the state is seen as becoming super powerful, but they have some kind of super morality that allows them to supersede the norms for everybody else. But how exactly that happens is not clear to me. It's never been made clear to me. Again, the whole voting thing, not to make a whole video about that, is, again, not a really good argument or a really clear, persuasive organizational structure. It's just an excuse or justification. I'm going to rule over you. Why? Well, because Odin said so. All right, well, that worked for a long time. Now it doesn't work, and so now it's like, well, I set up an election, and I set the rules to the election, and I allowed people to vote, and they could vote for me, or they could vote for my buddy here who I went to college with. But they had to vote for one of us, and I got 68% of the 1/3 of the people who actually bothered to vote. Hence, I can do anything now. Hence, all positive externalities accrue to me and entitle me to set whatever taxation rates I deem necessary on anybody. Even though this is justified because of positive externalities, I will make no attempt at any point ever to even try and assess what those are. I'm just going to come up with my own assessments that are, again, unilateral, they're arbitrary, and you're all bound to appreciate them and to abide by them. I just think that this justification is totally erroneous, and I think this is similar with all justifications of the government, is they don't stand up to any scrutiny. And the real justification is the one that he was alluding to first, is he thinks he benefits from it, so he's in favor of it. Now, I think that if he was to really look on the net, I don't think this is the case, because everything would be cheaper, and he'd have a lot more, basically, freedom of choice. He'd have more options. I think that he would find that to be better, but that would require him to learn a little bit more about society than to just look at this one institution, feel that he's being subsidized by it, and then justify it essentially because of that. Because the other justifications he brings up are so nebulous, and I say he, but this is kind of the archetypal anybody who favors government. The arguments that he brings up are so vapid and full of holes, and reliant on nebulous, abstract, non-concrete, essentially imaginary concepts that there's no way that they rationally thought up these justifications and then were like, oh, that's why I favor government, and that's the reason, because of magical accruement of debt to other people's positive externalities. No, it's, I like what I'm getting. These stupid libertarians are threatening me. What kind of bullshit can I say to convince them or to disprove their claims that this is illegitimate? And this is the best they can do. And that's one of the main reasons I'm still a libertarian, is because this is the best they can do. And it's not very fucking good. So, this will probably be the last video in a little while anyway. I bought a new book. There's a book out there. I forget the name. I think it's called The Problem of Political Authority. Somebody posted the first chapter on Reddit, and it was superb. And I think the Sauce is familiar with it, because I saw him post it on Facebook. The first chapter was amazing, and it's not by a libertarian. It's by, well, he's a libertarian now, apparently. It's by some professor of philosophy or someone from academia, who's not, he's not somebody who's been giving lectures at the Mises Institute for 20 years or anything like that. He's a guy, and it was really, you can read the first chapter in PDF, and it was really, really amazingly good. And I went ahead and bought it. It's expensive. It's brand new. It just came out in December, I think. Um, December 2012. It was expensive. It was like 40, 50 bucks. I was able to get it a little bit cheaper. I'm really looking forward to reading it. When I do, I will review it because it sounds like it's going to be a great book. That will probably be my next video. So, alright, my battery is about to die here. I'm going to go into the public library and try and buy some books. I doubt I'll find that one, but I already bought it on Amazon, so that would kind of be redundant. But, alright, talk to you later.